Yeah, so before we start, check the motivation. Yeah, so, purified. So and then practice morality, and then we have achieved precious rebirth, right? Yeah. So then, then that's more or less, concluding the small scope that we try to obtain, of course, precious rebirth in order to progress on the spiritual path. Yeah, so that's why we practice the morality of abandoning the 10 non-virtues, right? And then with the stillness prayer, and then the other, kasa practices of patience and effort and generosity, in order to get the right conditions. Yeah, so that's the small scope, right? Having the fear for the suffering of lower realms, we want to progress, and then we dedicate our merits in a way that's what it says. A motivation in accordance with. It doesn't say a motivation of the small scope, right? It says a motivation in accordance with the small scope. Yeah, so that means that you dedicate for enlightenment, but in order to achieve enlightenment, you have to have the right conditions, and for that purpose you need precious rebirth, right? So that's kind of what we focus upon in the small scope. But then we move to the great scope from the point of view of seeing that even the high rebirths, because the low rebirths we already saw, there's suffering. We don't want to be born there, but then even as humans and as gods or samsara in general, then we meditate on the suffering of samsara, right? The individual realms, the samsara in general suffering, the Four Noble Truths, the 12 links, so that we contemplate in order to get rid of the whole cycle of samsara, so that's the middling scope, the motivation in accordance with the middling scope. So we will go over a few types of suffering. Death, suffering, death, suffering. Some people think very depressing, but actually it's very constructive. If you do it well, right, then it's very constructive, because then you see, wow, this is the reality. But then you walk for means to get out of that kind of samsaric suffering, right? Especially I know, I don't say that. No. No, it's an inside joke. I leave it like that. Yeah. So suffering of samsara. So there's different types. So let's first have a look at the 3 types of suffering. The first 2 will be quite realized. Even the cats here outside, they have the realization of the suffering of suffering, and the suffering of change to a certain extent. They know when when there's pain, they don't like. One cat, it's a fight. So he had at night a fight. So it was a little bit. His ear was, I think, bitten, or how do you call it? So I was petting him, and then I almost touched the ear, and they say, "Well, it's okay." So that means that they like to be petted, but as soon as you touch that part of the ear, then, so because they don't like suffering, right? So exactly same thing. So now, luckily, there's more scientists understanding that animals also have feeling. But so you can see it's very obvious, right? That they all want happiness, don't want suffering. So the suffering of suffering is very easy to recognize, when we're sick or pain or animals, exactly same thing, right? So don't have to. But the aspect that suffering happens beyond control, that insight is often lacking, with people. That people just think, oh, they suffer, there's a sickness, but they don't think more than that, right? So and that's important to see, that it is beyond our control and it's not random, Nothing is random in samsara. So that's very important to see, that it happens to you while you don't like it, and it happens to you and you're not in control over that. Those two aspects are very important to look at for the suffering of suffering. Because it is caused, it has a cause, right? So that's interesting to look at, yeah. Same with the suffering of change. The easiest ones we can understand. If it's too hot, we put on the AC, and then the AC is too cold. And then we put it down. And then it lasts for about an hour. And then we have to put on again. Yeah, so that's pretty clear. Same, you come from London, you're just fed up with the overcast weather, and you come here and you think, oh, nice. And then after 2 days you think, oh, I want to go back. Yeah, it's really true, isn't it? Yeah. I have that sometimes. When I did retreat in Dharamshala in winter, it's cold. It's like this wet cold, right? So, and then the early days, the conditions were not now better in Dharamshala. But, and then it was so much looking forward to go back to South India. So nice. But then there's just a monsoon, and then the heat builds up, right? And it gets humid and hot. So then you can see that that's really the suffering of change. There's no satisfaction, right? That's very clear. That if it's food or relationships or meeting people or being with people, you look so much forward, and then it's just normal, right? So that means that these things are all contaminated. There's no satisfaction, right? Yeah. Or you think, oh, now I'll go for a walk. You go for a walk. Or now I have a shower. And then you have a shower. And it's kind of, you expect something more coming out of that activity than it actually brings. Right? Yeah. Or now go for a walk. And you go for a walk and you're tired. Now you go for a swim and then the water is too cold. Something like that. So it's always something that never makes it perfect, right? So that's exactly what this contamination is all about. That there's no satisfaction. And that means that all our happiness, they are in the nature of the suffering of change. So if you really want to have a depressive outlook, then it's all suffering, because the suffering of suffering is there. The suffering, the neutral feeling. We have 3 types of feeling. The neutral feeling is unstable, as we just said. And the feeling of happiness is contaminated, and that's in the nature of the suffering of change. So there's basically no real happiness in samsara. That's quite clear, Temporarily, yes, a little bit, but it doesn't last, And then you see people, you think, oh, that person is much more happy than I am. And then you talk, and then you see, oh, exactly the same. Yeah, it's true, right? That we really see that if you really start to understand other people, everybody is struggling with something. It's very clear. So that's important to understand. That suffering of change is just pervading everywhere. Especially higher God realms is different, but that's really there. So then, because the suffering of change, you can see the happiness is also not in control. It just changes, right? You see that the happiness we expect, and then we with this person, or we do this activity, and we expect happiness, but it's not there, because it's created in our mind, the expectation. And then the expectation is not met, so there's a kind of frustration, frustration may be a hard word, but there's no satisfaction, right? Yeah, you don't find what you're looking for. That's constantly there. Yeah. So that is all not just something that's random. That's something that is caused. Same as the direct suffering of a fever or a headache, or so some people have at the moment a few purifications going on. But so that you can see when you're sick, it just happens to you, right? It happens to you because of causing conditions, but there's an external factor, there's an internal factor, and there's many causing conditions behind that, right? So that means that nothing is random. Same that you cannot find real lasting happiness. That also is very interesting to look at, because that has a reason, that as long as we grasp at contaminated aspects of samsara, then of course we cannot expect a sustainable, stable form of happiness, right? That's very clear. Yeah. So that brings us to the third type of suffering, which is the most important to be understood, is all pervasive compounding form of suffering, right? That everywhere in your body it exists. At the moment you're comfortable, but you just have to pin a needle somewhere, or you get a headache, or you get sick. There's only the service is just waiting for the conditions to come, and then it ripens. Yeah, so that's everywhere, in samsara. Even in the God realms, or when you have your parties, then at that time it's fun, but then that's over, and then it's different, right? So that you can see that underneath the surface, there's always this cause for suffering sitting there. That just can come to the surface any moment. Yeah, we were quite healthy for some time, and then all of a sudden you get sick, or you get cancer, or you get complications, or things like that. Yeah, so then you can see that underneath the surface, as long as you have karma and afflictions, there is just no escape. Yeah, that insight is so important to get at. That all our sickness, all our suffering of change, is all caused by karma and afflictions, right? That's why we get sick. Of course, there's an external condition, but if you don't have the internal cause, then whatever the external condition is, you won't get sick, right? That's very clear. That because we have this contaminated aspect of karma and afflictions, that's why it's just sitting there underneath the surface, waiting for the conditions to be met. As we talked about with karma, the kasa. Karma doesn't get exhausted until it's been destroyed or comes to fruition, right? So that's what happens with our sickness and things like that. Then there's some external conditions or an accident, and then it gets triggered, and that's it. Yeah, then the ripening effect comes. So that insight of that's the most important one. As long as we have karma and afflictions, then we stuck. Yeah, and then karma, of course, are the activities of the afflictions, right? Physical or mentally or verbally, But the underlying aspect of all the afflictions is this view of the transitory collection, right? So as long as you have that aspect, then this all-pervasive compounding form of suffering will always get triggered. Even the highest God realms or the most happiness you can imagine. There was this Kasa, I forgot the name of the family. It's one of the most wealthiest family in India. And a man and a woman, they got married. I think his youngest son he has this big company called Reliance in India. I think the parties lasted for months or something like that. They spent millions. And they didn't look happy. I saw a few photos. They didn't look, it's supposed to be your happiest day of your life, but they didn't look happy. You see, it's very interesting. It's very sad, because they think that will give them happiness, but actually it's not, So people get to so much hardships and organizing parties and this, that, and getting a name, and this person comes to my party, or that person comes to my party. But it's just, and now it's over, and maybe they divorce in a year or two, who knows? It's very sad, So people just don't see that, right? That's That's, yeah. So as long as you've karma and afflictions, that's the main insight. That as long as that's there, there's no escape. It's constantly underneath the surface, this sneaking aspect of just waiting, that negative karma is sitting there, and then with afflictions, we create constantly negative karma, and then because of ignorance, we constantly create contaminated positive karma. Yeah, so with this ignorance of grasping an I am mine, you can see how important emptiness is. Without that, there's just no escape. There's no escape of contaminated forms of happiness. There's no escape of samsaric suffering. There's no escape of samsara. Full stop. Yeah. So you see that this view of the transitory collection is so important to understand and to see that this I that is imputed, that I that is imputed exists. Yeah. But we look at that, or we direct our mind or focus our mind on this existing aspect of the I, and then on top of that, we superimpose or project this inherent I. Yeah. So that's, and then all the things we do it just goes against reality. That's what it is. If you analyze your body and your mind, there is no independent entity there. But then mind makes you believe there's an independent I on top. So that's asking for trouble, because that's not according to reality, you see? So if you just believe things that are not according to reality and you live in a world of reality, then just constantly going against reality, right? So that's kind of creating constant causes for misunderstandings, and because of this inherent appearance and inherent grasping at inherent appearance, that's why we constantly are creating this contaminated aspect for ourselves. Yeah, so let's do a contemplation on the 3 types of suffering. Yeah, and then try to see that they are, of course, unwanted, but it just happens to us beyond control. It's kind of in this hijack of suffering, or this hijack of suffering of change, and this hijack of underneath the surface, sitting there sneaky, waiting for the conditions to arise, and then we suffer, right? So the all-pervasive compounded form of suffering. Yeah, so let's do a contemplation on those points. Yeah, before we do that, first we do the counting of the breath, as a means to generate concentration. Yeah. So let's do that for about a minute or two. Yeah, the counting of the breath. Yeah, so then imagine Buddha in front. Yeah. So build up the image for yourself, and then for half a minute, and then focus on what you have built up for half a minute. Yeah, also as means to concentrate. Yeah, so do that for about a minute in total. And then look at sentient beings surrounding yourself who are undergoing these three types of suffering, right? Some are, you can see in animal realm and human realm, the suffering of sickness, aging and death, very clear. You know, harming each other and things like that constantly. And they also have the suffering of change, right? Of moving around heat and cold, or, you know, just constantly expecting things, but that turns into suffering, you know. And then the most scary thing is that it's everywhere. You know, even temporarily they look okay, but then it just turns into suffering, you see? Yeah, so look at that and think, I really have to do something about it. I have to really understand three types of suffering and generate a strong renunciation. Progress on the path to help those beings, right? So based on that intention, make a request to Guru Buddha in front. Yeah. Yeah. So then the Buddha are pleased with your intention, and then white light comes. So do the purification of negative karma and pacification of obstacles for about half a minute. Yeah, so then think you're completely purified, and then looking at those suffering beings, and again make requests, and this time the yellow light comes, also that we do for about half a minute. Yeah, so then you're completely ready to do contemplation. So then look at first the suffering of suffering. So it can be a cold or fever or headache or cancer or stroke or infections, things like that. Then you see that something unwanted that causes pain and worry and many related aspects, but it is not random, right? It depends on causes and conditions, and it's something unwanted, and you're not in control the moment the sickness arises, you see. You don't want it, but you cannot control it. That's kind of an aspect we really have to look at. That is caused by common afflictions, right? Beyond our control. That's something which is in one way scary, and in one way we have to really understand that these types of sickness, they come by common afflictions, right? Just from underneath the surface, yeah? And then there's no control. And then you want to get better, but you cannot get better. And that's kind of an aspect to analyze, is that really true or not? Yeah, so analyze that for about a minute or two. So see that suffering or sickness is one thing, but that is caused by common afflictions, right? That's the real aspect that is actually unwanted. So that's kind of the real cause of this sickness, right? So that's something we have to do something about. Yeah, so come to that conclusion, and first of all, and focus on that for half a minute. And then let's have a look at the suffering of change, right? Yeah, so the things of escaping the sun and going in the shade and being too cold, or the AC and the heat, that's pretty obvious, But also the expectation we have and try to get somewhere to have happiness. It can be a holiday or go for a walk or a nice meal or seeing people or, then you expect, you think, oh yeah, no, this will be so nice. And I do that, and then you do that, and then it's all not really that kind of amazing as you expected. Yeah, so it's just like normal, So see that there's really a suffering of change there as well, right? That you think it's gonna cause you happiness, but then it turns into dissatisfaction or not finding what you're looking for, So that's true with everything. All the happiness we look for, so to say. All the happiness we look for, if it's meeting people or having nice meals or holidays or parties, it's not really that the happiness is completely fine there and you're completely satisfied like that. There's always something lacking. Yeah, so see that's really kind of what we think is happiness actually transform into not being satisfied and disappointed and changes to suffering, right? Yeah. So analyze that for yourself also. And the stronger the attachment is, the stronger the dissatisfaction, the stronger the disappointment, the stronger the unhappy mind after that. Yeah. So see these various aspects of the suffering of change, that is also related with afflictions, right? The higher the expectation, the stronger the attachment, the more suffering you actually experience, because there's no satisfaction there. And so analyze this also for about a minute or two. Yeah. So then see that the suffering of suffering, that there's something underlying that causes this suffering to emerge at a particular time, right? And the suffering of change is also something underlying that causes us not to be satisfied, or that causes us to want something else. You see? So this underlying aspect, constantly having these different types of karma and afflictions, the stronger that is, the more suffering you experience. So this all-pervasive, aspect, that's something really to look at. That's sitting there underneath the surface. Karma and afflictions. And the moments you feel okay, I'm quite okay, comfortable, but then you get sick. Or then you try to do things that makes you happy, but actually it doesn't really completely bring happiness. That's because this underlying aspect of the all-pervasive karma and afflictions is there. There's always this information of these activities created in the past that comes to ripening, and the afflictions that controls us, and then we create more suffering, So see, there's two aspects of karma and afflictions being the underlying aspect of the all-pervasive, sitting there always underneath the surface. So analyze if this is true or not for about a minute or two. then come to an overall conclusion, right, that sees that as long as you have this karma and afflictions, there is no escape. Then because of that, there's the suffering of suffering, and because of that, there's the suffering of change, right? So see, there's a need to abandon this aspect, to really put effort in understanding karma and afflictions, and to look for antidotes to eliminate that. If you really want to stop these types of suffering and suffering of change, you have to eliminate afflictions. You have to eliminate the karma related with these afflictions, or purify that karma, right? Yeah, so come to this final conclusion and then focus on that for about half a minute. And then make a determination or promise for yourself to study more and do more meditations and contemplations on analyzing this aspect, and then applying the antidotes to his afflictions, right? Your purification, and generate interest in understanding emptiness. Yeah, so make that kind of commitment for yourself to get rid of this underlying aspect of karma afflictions, right? Yeah. So come to that determination and focus on that for about half a minute. Yeah, so then we can stop and relax. And but then the main thing is to see that all karma, positive and negative, so the positive karma that transforms into, the suffering of change because contaminated, and the negative karma transform into the suffering of suffering, right? So you can see that positive karma is related with the suffering of change because it's contaminated, so it becomes the contaminated happiness, which is an illustration of the suffering of change. And negative karma, that creates the suffering of suffering, right? See? So then you have these two types of aspects. Negative karma created and contaminated positive karma being created. And that ripens in the suffering of suffering and the suffering of change. So that means we have to understand the need to purify and the need to apply the antidotes to the afflictions to prevent suffering from coming to being, and to make our virtuous activities less contaminated to prevent the suffering of change from coming into being, right? So, that sounds a bit depressive, but it's possible, and because you see that the all-pervasive form of suffering is rooted in karma and afflictions, right? Or directly caused by, I should say, karma and afflictions, and rooted in this ignorance, So if you see there's this apprehension of an I and mine, that first of all doesn't exist. Yeah, there's your body, there's your mind, But then on top of that, you know, yeah. So there's the body and the mind. There's the imputed I there. There's the mere I there that exists. So you look at that, but then on top of that you project or superimpose this I am mine inherently, which does not exist, but then you believe it exists. And then it becomes a very strange, you build a very strange aspect of, you think that's reality, well, it's not. And then make everything very concrete because of that, and then you grasp to permanence. You think you're not going to die, or you think your best friend or partner or family is not going to die, and you're not going to die. So because of this inherent grasping, you also grasp at permanent things as permanent, right? So then you can see. Then you also grasp at your happiness to always be there. Because if there's an inherent grasping at an I, then you grasp at things around you also in an inherent way. So you grasp at happiness always being there. And you grasp at the separation of suffering. And it's very stupid because that's not possible. You cannot have in samsara always happiness and never suffering. If you still have karma and afflictions and this grasping at an I, then you're just asking for trouble because you cling on to happiness and you cling on to the separation of suffering, right? So then when there's a suffering experiencing, you experience suffering and change, you cannot deal with it because you grasp to the separation of that, and that's not possible at that time, right? So you can see that grasping at inherent existence makes everything very concrete, and then you believe that, and then you grasp at happiness to always be there, or suffering to always be separated, and that's simply not possible. And then on top of having the suffering, then you create more mental suffering, right? So you can see the underlying cause for all this is this ignorance. Because of that ignorance, we create an affliction. Yeah, this ignorance grasping an I am mine. Because of that, an affliction arises. And because of that affliction, we create negative karma. And because of that, we have the suffering of suffering. And because holding on to this I, inherent I, we do engage in positive behavior, but that creates contaminated happiness, and that creates the suffering of change, you see? So it all comes back to this ignorance, yeah, this apprehension of inherent I that causes afflictions to be stronger, and then you create negative karma. And that causes you to grasp at things stronger, and that creates positive karma, and that transforms into the suffering of change. So that's kind of an insight that's important to see. That grasping at this I produces afflictions, that produces the suffering of suffering, and that produces a grasping at inherent existence of the virtuous things we do, and that creates contaminated happiness, and that's in the nature of suffering of change. So this all-pervasive form of suffering is rooted in this ignorance, right? That's a very important aspect to see. And then you have to generate the interest in cutting this root, or to get rid of this ignorance, you know? Yeah, if you've done that, then you can go home. Yeah. But maybe meditate on a bit before you forget it. Because the thing is, if you don't meditate on long enough, then you go home and you forget. Or it's not as strong, right? Yeah. So yeah, let's do contemplation on that aspect, that seeing that this ignorance of this apprehension of an inherent I motivates or creates afflictions to be stronger, and that creates negative karma, that creates the suffering of suffering. And then, because of this ignorance being strong, also without the virtuous activities, that creates happiness, but that happiness is contaminated, and the suffering of change. So, and there's no non-contaminated happiness being experienced, so the only two things we have is the suffering of suffering and the suffering of change. Of course, there's some neutral feelings as well, but so you can see both of them are rooted in this ignorance, right? So then you see that ignorance you have to tackle and kick it out. That's not, the mind of ignorance you have to kick out. That's what it is. Yeah. Yeah, so let's do a contemplation on those points. Yeah, so first look at beings around you and see that they either have the suffering of suffering or the suffering of change, and they are certain gods, they only have the suffering, or pervasive compounding form of suffering. So when they come out of that state, then they have the other two again, right? So look at beings. They just constantly, because of they don't understand ignorance, that's exactly why they're stuck all the time. They think, oh, I have happiness, but it transforms into suffering again. And then they experience suffering and suffering. So see how beings are stuck because of this ignorance of grasping at an I. Yeah. And then think, I have to really do something about this, and request the Guru Buddha in front to bestow blessings, to get an understanding of these points, generate renunciation and bodhicitta and realize emptiness, Yeah, so make request to Guru Buddha like that. And then the Buddha is very pleased, and from his heart comes a white light, so we do purification. For about half a minute. Completely filled, white light. Then we do purification with a yellow light. Yeah. No purification, establishing the insight and realizations. Yeah, also half a minute. Yeah, so then filled with a yellow light. Yeah, and then just analyze what we just talked about. Does that make sense? That we see whenever there's strong desire, of obsessive aspect of desire, there's a sense of I, right? There's strong anger, there's also a sense of an I, this inherent I, you grasp it. The stronger that I is, the grasping at that I, the stronger that affliction becomes. The stronger that affliction is, the stronger the action becomes. The stronger the action is, the heavier the karma becomes, experiencing suffering, right? So see that there's a relationship between this ignorance and affliction, then generating a heavy negative karma, and then experience the suffering, the result of that. Yeah, so analyze this for yourself, if that's really true, for about a minute or two. So this ignorance produces afflictions, afflictions produces suffering. And then on top of that, when you experience suffering, you have this strong grasping to be separate from that suffering. So there also, the stronger the I is apprehended, or the stronger you grasp at I, the stronger you grasp at the separation of suffering. And when that's not possible, then you actually suffer even more, you see? It's also there, there's this ego or this I causing trouble, you know? So you see also there, it's kind of related to this ignorance. Yeah, so analyze that also for about a minute. Yeah, and then also see that the happiness we experience, that happiness is not lasting, right? It's always changing. So that's caused by this ignorance that motivates positive deeds. Yeah, that always we think, I do this, I do that. And sometimes on a more subtle level, or we see the activity we're doing and the practice of prostration or visualization of Vajrasattva, things like that. We still see it as kind of individual aspects, or independent aspects, or existing from their own side aspects. You see? So we practice generosity or morality or, whatever we engage in, there's always this sense of an I. And it's completely nonsense, because there is not such an I. But because of that thinking it exists, that I exist, all our actions, they become this concrete, independent ideas, and that's why it causes so many problems. And that's why it causes this contaminated happiness, and that transforms into suffering. Yeah, so analyze this also for about a minute or two. And then when you experience this contaminated suffering of change, this temporary happiness, then because of this I, you think, that exists from its own side, you grasp at this happiness, and you don't want to be separated from this happiness. And the stronger the I is, the stronger that grasping is, and then where that happiness goes, you get incredible kind of mental reaction that you don't like that, and then you have this dissatisfaction and not being content and being disturbed, you see? So there also, the I is causing the problems, because you see you think there's a strong I, and then you grasp at that, and then you grasp at things that are momentary, you grasp at permanent, and you think, I want to have this happiness and keep that. But that's not possible, you see? So that also there, the grasping and the I are causing problems, Yeah, so analyze that also for about a minute. So then come to a conclusion that either negative karma created that causes suffering, or positive karma that causes this contaminated happiness or the suffering of change. It's rooted in this aspect of an inherent I, right? So that ignorance is the cause. That ignorance has to go. Yeah, so I come to that final conclusion and focus on that for about half a minute. And then make a strong determination to put more effort in examining these points and understanding ignorance better, to study and contemplate ignorance and emptiness, Make a strong determination for yourself to do that. Yeah, and do that for about half a minute. Focus on that commitment for about half a minute. Yeah. Then request the Buddha to blow blessing inspiration to do that. Yeah, so then the Buddha comes to your crown, facing the same direction. Then the throne dissolves into the lotus. The Buddha becomes smaller, descends the crown, throat. Then dissolves into light at the level of your heart, and the Buddha's holy mind becomes one with your mind. Then you think you have some happiness there, or experience level of the heart, some sensation. You think there is no real inherent I to be found, right? Yeah. Yeah, so then we dedicate. Jancho semcho rinpoche magye pana gege geba nyamba meba yang gone gonle baba shu toni tawa rinpoche magye pana gege geba nyamba meba gone gonle baba shu gewa gunde yanda Dame chugi pela longjens Sada langi yunta razu Doje changi kopanyu doshu. Okay, thank you.